Party
here.
Blue Lake.
And hold on, let me make sure.
It's recording in red on mine, so I think you got it going.
Okay, I think we're recording now. Go ahead, Clark.
Yeah, I see the
Yep.
I see the recording icon, so we must be.
Okay.
Now we have that verified. I'll introduce myself. I'm Clark Heckard, president of the club. My QTH is in Placida near Redstone, and my call sign is K3NI. My wife, AB3UDU, is here. She just got out of the shower, so she's not ready to be on screen yet.
Oh,
So I'll do her introduction. And next, I'm just going to go with what I'm looking at here is Fred. You want to say something, Fred?
Good morning, Fred and Woody Creek, K0BK. As it says on the screen, I think we all know each other here.
I think we do too. Go ahead, Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess, W6CKC. I'm in Basalt, and we are recording.
Okay, Bob, KI0G.
Yeah, Bob KI0G in Glenwood.
Next is Bob and Sue.
I'm Sue, N0DBY in Glenwood.
I'm Bob, K9MWM in Glenwood, and I have a question for Clark. Maybe for the next meeting or whatever, you could take some pictures of your installation in marble, and I'd love to see it.
Yeah, good idea.
That'd be fun.
I've got a whole bunch of pictures, guys, and they're all on my cell phone. And I think I have to email them to my, whatever, and then convert them. So yeah, I've got the material for it, but I have to figure out a way to display it.
We'll talk you through that if you got questions.
I think that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, I dump my iPhone every once in a while and struggle.
no,
Yeah.
you can log on again with the iPhone. I mean, if you and then just show the pictures from there. But it's too hard to do it while you're talking.
Okay. Well, next on my screen is Richard. So go ahead, Richard.
Hi, hi everybody. Richard, K4ULD. I should be in Glenwood Springs, but I'm in Sanford, Florida. In fact, I'm looking a bit like a chipmunk at the moment because I had some dental work done and I'm all bruised. So my daughter thinks I look like a chipmunk with peanuts in my mouth.
Oh, I'm glad you explained that. I thought for sure it was a Botox commercial.
No, quite. Thought.
Tony, go ahead. Is Ann around, by the way?
Not yet. She will be back in a little while. She had to do a mail run for the church. Tony, WA1ENO, Hanover, Massachusetts, and Ann, WB1ARU, when she gets back.
Okay, David, and you and your buddy, which I know you're both sixes, but I don't think I've introduced myself. So go ahead and you guys introduce yourself and we'll go on.
Okay, I'm Dave Northrop, WB6JUI, and I'm a charter member of the club back when. And as my house guest is Dick Rayleigh, KX6B, who you've heard on the net a few times.
Yep.
And we celebrated my birthday this
They can hear you, Mom.
past Thursday night. And among the gifts that he bought me was a Linko 6-meter transceiver. So we're going to play with that while he's here, among other things. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Great.
hi, I'm Dick, KX6B, and I could only take this quarantine COVID thing so long, and about 7.5 months, I just had to come down and see my friend Dave. So here I am. I'll be here till the end of the month. Good to see everyone again.
I'm sure we hear you on that business of just having to get out of the house. Okay, Ken and Betty, you want to take it?
Yeah, Ken, KB0HP in rifle, and
Betty, KD0YDH in Rifle, and it's good to see everyone on this morning.
Woohoo!
Kevin.
Hey, Kevin, KD0MA in Glenwood. He's the treasurer.
Go ahead, Steve. You got it.
Steve, W0SRG in Aspen. And I was on a Zoom earlier this morning that usually runs until 10:15 or so, so I thought I'd be late, but they ended at 9:59 and a half. And I had no trouble just switching accounts.
All right, Dave, you're the last person on my screen, so you can wrap it up.
This is Dave, KD0WQC in Rifle.
Okay. I guess according to the agenda, we're supposed to do announcements, and I think I wanted to comment on the work that we've done, or I've done. And I guess it's we, because we had a committee over in Marble, and the repeater is up and running. It's a 146760 VHF repeater, and the PL is 107.2. And it works pretty well from Redstone on up into Marble and up into the wilderness area up in there, and over to I think the Colbrand Road on the backside of Chair Mountain. So it covers the whole Marble area and down here in Placida and all that pretty well. About the repeater that I'd like to say is that it shows a combination of some of the new and some of the old, because the link radio is supported by an all-star node at my house, and it's connected by a UHF link using an old police UHF transceiver and a new TYT, I think they're called, Chinese transceiver. But it's, it converts the voice to digital and goes through a all-star node over in Vail. And I think, Kevin, you're going to have to comment on this. On the Vail node, don't you connect in such a way that then it's relayed over to 8.8? Is that how that works?
Correct. There's a UHF link from a node here at my house up to 8.8, and from the house it goes onto the internet over to the Vail hub.
Okay, so the only other comment I have on it is this shows the way things were done before with an analog repeater and the possibilities of new things. And I'll grant you that we're using the internet for our link. And the reason for that is I couldn't get it to work on the UHF link on the, I guess it's called the backbone, on Sunlight. Now I could get it to work sporadically, but it would have just been another degradation of our capabilities, really, to use it that way. So with no other way to go, I decided to go with an all-star node, and I got great help from Frank and Pete, and even Bob Ludke helped out, and the equipment was provided. I may have paid for some of it. I don't even remember anymore. But it was all programmed and ran, and I pretty much just used the all-star node as an appliance. And you've heard me check in on the net all through the winter when I was having to get through on 8.8, and it worked pretty well. I mean, it's got some usual kind of things where I get kicked off in the middle of the night, or there's some misconnection or whatever. But I think the one thing I do want to emphasize is that something that Pete's been saying, it's N0 ECT, about the fidelity of the sound that you get off of the all-star node. And he's right, it sounds a lot better than anything coming out of our analog net. So I guess it bodes well for the future with digital radio. But other than that, it seems to be up and running, and I don't have any real problems with it right now. And if you want to go up and use it, Marble, feel free. You won't be the first, though. Larry checked in from Carbondale, and he made the leap. Now that's not supposed to work, but there's a hot spot down there, or a hot streak or something, where the reflection is just right, and you can get through. And I've noticed it several times, so it's there. Bob, I guess I'm going to refer to you on the next. Do we have any other announcements? I mean, I know if we're all here, we've read the meeting announcement, and it's got all the listings for the Zoom meetings and all of that. Is there anything else that's coming up that we need to?
Clark, I have one.
Okay, go ahead, Jess.
We met this week, Steve, myself, Kevin was in there, about the Aspen project of the Up Valley. And we're looking at trying to, right now, the thought is to go forward in either Shelton or Steve's place with an all-star node similar to the one Clark, you and Bob put up. So that's a great possibility. We're looking in that direction. And Steve and Kevin, if you have anything, go ahead and add to it if you care to.
Just the shelf is ready in my garage. If that turns out to be an acceptable location, I think Sheldon is up on Smuggler, so that I think is technically a better location. But he may not have enough room to put it in his house. So either way, I got a shelf. I got good Wi-Fi, and I could wire it in if necessary. And I got an antenna on the roof and AC power about 5 feet away from the shelf. So that shouldn't be a problem.
All right, that ought to give you a nice link with decent audio, and the connections will be good. The thing I want to emphasize, and I know with this repeater, is you got to remember there's a delay when you go through the all-star system. And there's like a 2-second delay when you start off. And I know that Frank has done a lot to cut down on the delay time, but it's not as good as the analog system as far as switching back and forth. And there was something else I wanted to comment on that.
I have another comment. Just an update on Anvil. As far as I know, I talked to Kevin a couple days ago. We haven't received the cables yet to hook up the solar panels. Jim and Phil and 0KE went up to the site during the week. I think it was Wednesday, I'm not sure, and hauled all the old batteries off to the recycling firm there in Sill. So the batteries are out of the site. Miraculously, last weekend, the batteries charged up enough, maybe due to the sun angle on those panels up there, and the repeater came back to life, charging 10 amps. And it was up through the net Sunday night, and then whenever they went up Tuesday or Wednesday, they took the batteries, and obviously we don't have power there again, but that bodes well for just replacing the batteries when we go up there, that everything should come up quickly, and there shouldn't be any hardware issues with the system. So that's what we got to do. It looks like we got another week of good weather coming up, so I hope the cables come through so we can get up there and do that. That'd be nice to do in good weather when it's easy to drive up there. And Jim said, 80LI said that they only passed 2 vehicles, or one was behind them, and then they passed one going up to the site on the JQS trail. So that's still pretty good before the other hunting seasons start up. Just, archery, I guess, and muzzle loaders going now. So anyway, that's it on Anvil. We'll try to get up there and get all that stuff going in one day so we don't have to do 2 trips.
I remembered what I was going to talk about. It's grounding issues. I finished up on the tower. The tower's got 3 ground rods on it, and there's another ground rod that I put in down by the house, the Kelly house, and I also tied into their electrical system ground. and I put in alpha delta surge suppressors on the coax coming into the house. But what I didn't do is I didn't ground the repeater itself yet, or the UHF link radio, or the duplexer. And I guess I'll refer to Kevin or Bob or somebody that knows how to do these installations. Just what should I be doing for grounding on the radio equipment? Either of you want to take it?
Ken can do that too.
Well, I know Ken's an expert on grounding. The reason why I skipped them is I don't know how many repeater installations he's done.
You can never do enough grounding.
Okay.
The only thing I could say is just the radios need to go to a common bus, so that you're going to a single grounding point, and then that bus, whatever that copper plate or whatever, goes directly to a ground rod, short as possible.
Okay, what I've got is I've got a number 4 green wire that's copper braided, and I have yet to go in through the window that the Kellys have where the coaxes go in. And then I come in and the duplexers are on the floor. And I don't know how you ground a duplexer. It just looks like
You visited with him on different one. Yeah, he's a nice guy.
Clark,
You do the chassis is what you do.
on the duplexes, you usually ground to the coax connectors on the duplexer itself. And that way you get the coax and the duplexer both to a common point.
Okay, well, you know, the
You just take braid and wrap it around and clamp it on with a stainless steel clamp.
Okay. I can do that. That's fine. And the UHF radio, turns out there's a side mount, whatever you want it. You know, 2 screws coming in on the side. And I've got mating screws, and I got some star washers. One ground lug on that, which is fine. And then the controller and repeater, there must be a place in there somewhere. But when I bought the thing from Andre, he never explained anything about grounds. So I have to go up and take a look and see how it is. Oh, and then I have to, a little side item, then I have to ground the Kelly stove up on the 2nd floor, because apparently they have a minor St. Elmo's fire kind of situation that occurs every time there's an electric storm that goes by. So it seemed like a good idea to just ground that. And like I say, I've got a network of grounds. I've got 3 on the hillside, 1 down by the house for me, and it's also connected to the Kelly ground for their electrical system. And their electrical system is another thing, because they're not tied to the grid at all. They just have a generator installation. I think I'm going to explain to them how I would jury rig it so that they can use their inverter to run their house as well. But you end up with just only the 120 circuits will work. The 240, which oddly enough they have a water heater. They have a, yeah, I can hear the echo. They have a water heater, electric water heater. I don't know why you'd ever put one in a cabin off grid, but whatever. Okay, are there any other announcements that we need to make?
What about our change in Echolink?
Yes.
We might want to talk about that.
Echolink is no longer operating out of Ken's house, as I understand it, and it has been switched to a all-star modified node or something like that. Maybe you want to explain it, Ken.
Yeah, that's what I understand. Frank has and Pete have rerouted it. So instead of having to do the radio link from my house up to Sunlight, it now goes instead through the Vail hub, I believe. And so because of that, we don't have that delay. It's much shorter than it used to be. And so that's a big improvement. There's really no change for anybody. They can use it just as they've done before. It's just that on the back end here, we're rerouting it through the All-Star node.
Much better audio.
Any other comments? Well, if there are no other comments, Bob, KI0G, we can start the presentation.
Okay, everybody see that now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not full size yet, Bob, and someone's hacksawing.
I gotta
Take
come
it
over
full
here.
screen.
Actually, let me turn the volume up.
Yes, why don't you mute everybody?
Yay.
Okay, well, anyway, let's let's go back in time a little bit. This is about 1974. The 2-meter FM is just being introduced into Western Colorado. At this time, there's one repeater down in Grand Junction on 3494. We don't have a repeater in this area yet. At that time, repeaters had to actually have their own license. They had to be licensed separately, and we eventually acquired a repeater license for WR0ANT, and that was on the 288 location on Sunlight at that time, and we went forward. But at the time of this adventure, we were basically 3494 and 52 simplex. So that's what I had in the way of equipment going in at that time. Most of the ham stuff was converted surplus, or converted commercial. But I managed to. I did pick up a Drake TR22, which is the unit that's showed there in the bottom. It's just, that isn't mine, but it's identical to the one I had, including the case and all that sort of thing. It was one of the first self-contained ham radio units were available. It had, of course, it was battery powered. The batteries were included in it, and it had a small whip antenna that you see here that extended out of the top, and a microphone. It was 6-channel, and it was crystal controlled. You had to purchase crystals.
Bring those slides up. They're off on the side. Someone click the slides.
You need to go full screen and show the slides as you talk about them.
I beg your pardon?
Full screen, and we're looking at slide number 1, and you're talking about slide number 2.
Uh-oh, we got a problem here. All right. Okay.
Nice on.
Hi, Brian.
Hello.
Yeah, I know.
The neighborhood.
Well, like, what is? Okay, well, let's start over again and see if we can get anywhere. I apologize for that. That's my, obviously that's my screw up.
It wasn't muted when I said that.
Who's doing the hacksawing?
knows?
What did he get?
No, they can see it up top. What did I get?
Yeah. Ah,
There
that's
there you
good.
go, Bob.
Good, Bob.
Is that better now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, now let's see if we change the slides. Okay, do you have the second slide?
Perfect.
Perfect,
Okay,
yeah.
all right. Anyway, I'm sorry for that. My glitch. You'd think eventually I learned how to do this and do it more often. Anyway, to go back over, that's the Drake TR-22 that I had. 6-channel, crystal controlled, and it put out 1 watt. So it was not a heavy duty radio by any means for 2 meters, but I managed to make some contacts here. Primarily when I would go to Grand Junction, I would get on the 3494, or if I was happened to catch some people on the road on 52 simplex or passing through Glenwood. It was self-contained in the sense that it had batteries, and you charged it from the AC plug, so it had a built-in power supply that it could run off of, or the battery power. Didn't have long battery, but it was good enough for the purpose. And this was significant because the radio had to be self-contained because we had no electrical system at all in this aircraft. The aircraft had no battery. It was magneto ignition, no starter, nothing like that. So any radio I used had to be self-contained. Here's a little. I'm not sure whether very many of you are familiar with the Piper Club, but it was basically a pre-World War II training aircraft that was also used in training of pilots during World War II. And ours was a 1946 model. It had a 65 horsepower engine. And as I said, it had no starter, no lights or anything else like that. And I actually learned to fly in one and soloed in 1958 in Grand Junction. It wasn't this particular aircraft. However, I did fly in this particular aircraft that we took to Alaska because it was in Grand Junction and it was one of several aircraft that were available for rental. So I had actually flown in it. One thing that you might be interested in, this figure here, TBO 1800 hours, that stands for time between overhauls. In other words, the FAA requires a private aircraft to be torn down and basically checked to specifications and then rebuilt. This aircraft had just gone through a rebuild and a relicensing, and it belonged to a high school friend of mine, KL7GOY, and he was living in Alaska at the time, and we had talked back and forth on ham radio and everything else like that. He wanted to take it back up to Alaska and asked me to go along with him and help him fly it. Of course, I was more than happy to do so. Just some of the general statistics on the thing. It has quite a long, wide wing, and it can fly very slowly, and it can take off at a very short distance. The takeoff distance, for instance, on the aircraft is listed as 370 feet, which is it is really short. So it's a early short field takeoff and landing type aircraft. Cruising speed, they say maybe maximum speed they list as 87 miles per hour. Cruise speed 75. We didn't do that well. I recall at least one occasion where the cars on the highway below us were passing us, so we were considerably under 60 miles an hour. But anyway, that was where it is. As in any of these, as I have in the past, if you've got any questions, just break right in. The aircraft is fabric covered. In other words, it has a steel tube frame, which is covered with a linen fabric or another type of fabric, and that in turn is coated with airplane dope. Those of you who have made model airplanes, it's the same stuff, smelled just the same, just as toxic and everything else. But that was what it was covered with. Here is basically the flight that we took. In private aircraft, you don't think in the sense of miles. You think more in the sense of time. Hours are the big dividing lines. So it was well over 3,000 miles, and we actually flew it in August of 1974. So it was close in time. The overall flight took 5 days and 42 flight hours. Again, you probably could have driven it in close to that same time. One of those days was actually, we were grounded because of weather in Fort St. John. And so we spent 24 hours there, along with about 6 or 8 other small aircraft that were being ferried to back to Alaska. We met one. The trip was filled with interesting people. One person we met there was a lady school teacher from Alaska, and every summer she would go back to her former home in Minnesota, and she would buy a small single-engine aircraft, and then she would fly it back to Alaska at the end of the summer and sell it for probably 3 to 4 times what she had purchased it for. So it was kind of her way of supplementing her money and getting home for a visit and everything else. She was a fascinating person to meet. We left from Grand Junction, flew over to Salt Lake, and basically headed north up through Idaho and Great Falls, Montana. And at Great Falls, Montana, we were joining the route that the Allied forces used in World War II to ferry aircraft to Russia. And Great Falls was one of the big staging areas for aircraft. And we in turn we being the U.S., flew these aircraft to Fairbanks and 2 other fields in Alaska, where Russian pilots came in and took over, flew them across the Bering Strait and down into Russia, and eventually into as aircraft as that Russia used. Russia was our ally, remember, in World War II, and they were both fighter aircraft and bombing aircraft. It's kind of interesting to note that there was a total of, let me see if I can find my notes here. There were a total of well over 7,000 aircraft that we ferried up to Alaska. 7,983 planes were flown over this route between September 1942 and September 1945. Of that number, 130 were lost either through mechanical failure, pilot error, or weather, or anything else that's involved. So it's a tough route, but again, it was kind of fun to retrace that portion of history. Okay, here's the. This was my logbook. You don't have much room in a Piper, so this was basically a little pocket diary that I kept in my shirt pocket, and so my writing is not too clear. But anyway, we left Grand Junction at 6:20 in the morning, and I talked to Pikes Peak 400. That's that PPR. Pikes Peak 500. That's that PP 500, which is a tactical call for the Colorado Wing of Civil Air Patrol. At that time, I was active in the Civil Air Patrol, and actually, the Civil Air Patrol still has a repeater in our shack up on Sunlight, and their frequency was just above the ham band. I don't remember what, 150, something like that. I also talked to Bill, W0MTK. Bill was a real pioneer in VHF radio in the Western Slope. He's the one that actually built and maintained the 3494 repeater in Grand Junction, along with W00GDC. As I mentioned, the aircraft had just been overhauled and relicensed. And of course, like anything like that, there's bound to be some glitches. The first glitch we discovered shortly after we took off was that the trim tab was installed upside down. Now, a trim tab is a little flap that is on the elevator, the horizontal piece at the back of the airplane. And its purpose is to relieve you of the pressure on the control stick, so you don't have to keep holding it in one position. You could adjust this this little tab so that you can't really fly completely hands off, but you don't have to be exerting a lot of energy to hold the stick back, for instance, and everything else like that. Well, we discovered it was upside down, which was not a crisis, but it still had, it took some learning anyway. We also discovered that we couldn't climb over 8,500 feet, which fortunately wasn't a problem because we were able to kind of dance our way over the Rocky, or over the divide into Salt Lake and make it in there anyway. We also discovered another glitch. This aircraft had two gasoline tanks. As it came from the factory, it had a single 12-gallon tank that was up front behind the engine, and this one also had a wing tank, which when the nose tank got down so far, you would open a valve, and the wing tank then would drain into the nose tank, and you had another 2 or 3 hours of flying time. We averaged about 5 gallons per hour. Again, we're using those hours like we do in aircraft. And so we're burning 5 gallons an hour, and that turned into maybe a little bit over 2 hours flying time. So we soon discovered that we had to land about every 2 hours. And strange thing happened: as soon as we get on the ground, the wing tank would drain fine and fill up the nose tank, but it wouldn't do it in the air. Anyway, we discovered that, and we headed on up the way. One of the first stops that we made was in Salt Lake City, or outside of Salt Lake City, and I talked to WA7VNQ Dawn on Salt Lake. That was direct. That was a 5-2 simplex. This is Mallet City. It's just north of Salt Lake, and those of you who have driven through Salt Lake recognize the atmospheric conditions. They were just as bad way back then as they are now. We always seem to have that smog and everything else. But this is it. This is the aircraft. As I mentioned, we didn't have a starter, so one of us would get out of the airplane, and we'd go through the whole contact bit and everything else that you saw in the World War II movies, and one of us would prop the airplane. In other words, swing the prop, making sure that you didn't lean your head forward, and making sure that your arms were out of the way when it took off, and everything else. This was not new, because most of the airplanes that I had been flying, learning, required this, so this was no big deal. If you notice the engine there, those of you who are familiar with the Volkswagen, it's very similar to a Volkswagen. It's air-cooled, 4-cylinder, horizontally opposed engines, and it actually develops about as much horsepower as the first Volkswagen did. The doors are kind of neat. They were two-piece. The top half swung up and hooked onto the wing here, and the bottom half swung down. You could fly it safely with the doors open. You were seat belted in, of course, and everything else. It was awfully windy, but you could do that if you really wanted to do that. Anyway, we stopped. This was kind of one of our first stops on the way in. The first stop was in Green River, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. We're as far as Salt Lake. We discovered the problems and everything else. Any questions? Oh, these are the mountains back here that we managed to sneak over with our ceiling of 8,500 feet. It wasn't hazardous. I'm sure we cleared it by 1,000 feet, which is kind of the requirement. But anyway, we made it that far.
Well, what were you able to fix the problem with the wing tank not fill?
Oh yeah, that's coming up. that's another adventure. Okay, this is the instrument panel. On the left, we've got the tachometer. If you notice, it's it indicates counterclockwise, which is a little different than most of the tachometers that we're used to in cars. In other words, the needle's resting on 0 now, and at 1,000 RPM, it would be about at the 10 o'clock position where the 10 is, and so that the needle is rotating in this direction. This is the altimeter, in other words, the altitude gauge. We set that at Grand Junction because we knew the field elevation at Grand Junction was 4850 or something like that. So we dialed in 4850, and that was kind of how we measured our altitude from there on back. This is a compass. First of all, the compass is up here in the center. If I can find my, oops, right there. And this is the compass, and this is the compass correction card. In other words, a compass being a magnetic thing, it's affected by anything metal. And so each aircraft at that time had this correction card, which basically said if you want to fly north, you fly 007 degrees. That was really the magnetic heading that you would fly, giving all the variables in and the adjustments and everything else. Okay. We have oil pressure and oil temperature over here. I misspoke. This is the altimeter. This is the airspeed indicator. Basically, the speedometer's here. This is the altimeter that we set. It's showing right there. This particular one is showing about 800 feet elevation. This is not our aircraft. This is a photograph that I found on the internet. So it was probably taken back there in Tony's part of the world with that elevation. This primer pump over here on the right, it's a plunger thing. Those of you who had Coleman stoves or Coleman lanterns, it was similar to that. You pump it up 3 or 4, a fixed number of times before you try to start the engine. Any questions? Oh, here's the gas gauge. I forgot to mention that. This is the filler cap for the nose tank. Nose tank's right up here. This is the gas gauge. It's basically a cork on the end of a piece of wire. And obviously, when there's a lot of it sticking out, you know you've got gas. When it gets down here, you're kind of in trouble. You ought to start looking for a place to land if you haven't already figured one out. So this is the gas gauge. This is basic flying, folks. I mean, it doesn't get, well, the Wright brothers were a little more basic, but they haven't advanced much here. Any questions? Oh, this give you an idea of the framework. This is like the framework of the entire aircraft. It's tubular steel, and the throttle's over here on the side and that sort of stuff.
Bob, I have a question.
Yeah.
Back in the first picture, you had some antennas on the top.
That is, I saw that. That is not an antenna. That is something that it was a house or something in the background. There are no antennas on the top.
Okay.
That was yeah, you good eye. You noticed that, and let me see. Yeah, there it is, right there. It looks like actually looks like there's 3 antennas up there, but they are on the house back. You can see some other stuff in there, and they're kind of in the horizon. But no, there's no antenna. The only antenna we had was the built-in antenna on the little rig.
Hey, Bob, I have a question.
Shoot.
How much coffee can you drink?
Not much.
actually, that 2-hour flight time was pretty close. And remember, I'm probably only in my 30s at that time. At this time, we probably had better cut that back to about 45 minutes, I think. So it would be a really slow trip now.
I'll make a comment. Am I unmuted? No.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, I just say, oh, I'm muted.
No. Oh, now you are.
Now you're muted.
No, you're muted.
You're muted, Tony. Click down at the bottom of your picture.
Just touch your space bar.
There. Now you're good. Okay, what was your question, Tony?
No, I'm still not mute.
No, that was good.
You're good.
Okay, I was just going to say that Piper was very cheap in manufacturing airplanes, and he made it as cheap as he could He used standard hardware, which later on became illegal, and to build these things. And the tubing in the frame is very, very thin, the steel tubing. It's really amazing to see a fuselage without anything on it. So, but he used to use friction tape to clamp things together onto the steel tubing in the plane, anything that had to be put on. And it's still legal to do it today in a Piper Cub, the J3, to do that kind of stuff. So that's what I just wanted to say.
Tony brings a lot of expertise in this. He and his brother have been working on several of them, I guess, and are just assembling a later model of this, but it's still basically the same configuration and bigger engine and much better instruments and everything else like that. But anyway, so I'm really glad Tony is here. We did, Helena, Montana had a repeater, and we were able to get onto that. I also worked W0ELD at Great Falls, Ken, and also we landed at Cutbank, Montana. Those of you who used to watch television, Cutbank and Fraser, Colorado used to be the two coldest places in the United States in the old days. Anyway, at this point, we're at customs. We're going into Canada in Lethbridge, Alberta. I worked VE6U, and I'm not sure about that, UVT, I think. I should mention here that you were required to have a permit to operate the ham radio in Canada. And you applied to their FCC, which is, I would call Radio Canada or something like that. And they in turn, you sent them a copy of your license. They in turn sent you a cardboard certificate that told you that you could do there. We had to clear customs at Lethbridge because we're obviously bringing in an aircraft and everything else like that. So while we were there, we decided we've been messing with this wing tank, trying to get it to drain into the nose tank and everything else like that. We tried all sorts of maneuvers. We didn't roll the aircraft, but we came very close to it and pitch it up and pitch it down. We couldn't break the vacuum or whatever else that was there. It just wasn't working. And of course, heading into Alberta and up basically Alcan Highway, we knew that the airports were going to be a little few and far between, and we needed really more than 2 hours cruising time to make it from one airport to another. And we'll talk about that a little later on too. So when we landed at Lethbridge, we got a ride into town and went to a drugstore and bought about 10 feet of surgical tubing. You know, that's a rubber tubing. Its current most popular use is for the slingshots that we use to shoot antennas over trees, so the wrist rocket or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, we get this back, and the gasoline cap is similar to the one on the car, but it has a J-shaped piece of tubing that sticks out of the top like this. And you put the gas cap on with the tubing facing forward. You put it on backwards or facing back. The slipstream of the aircraft can have a tendency to siphon the gasoline out. And so you want to be sure it's pointing forward. And I suppose that in the ultimate design, it was thought that would pressurize the gas tank. Well, it wasn't doing it in our case. Anyway, we put this tubing on the end, ran it into the cockpit, and of course we needed about 2 feet rather than 10 feet. So we've got 8 feet of surgical tubing wound around our head inside in that framework we saw, everything else like that. We get in the air, and we run the nose tank down a ways, and one of us grabs a hold of the end of the tubing and blows on it. Sure enough, we've got fuel flowing from the wing tank into the nose tank in typical ham fashion. We've solved the problem, and everything works great. Anyway, Calgary also had a repeater, and I worked some stations through there. The name of this type of flying is basically low and slow, and that's what we were doing. I'd forgotten whether this is Calgary or Edmonton, but it had a nice bend in the river, and we got a nice view of it. And as you can see, when I said I could tell cars were going faster than we were in some cases, we were low enough to do that. We generally cruised at about 1,000 feet above the ground. And we, at one point up here somewhere, we managed to get up to 95 miles per hour ground speed. Most of the time, we weren't anywhere near that.
Faster than it's supposed to be.
Okay. Landing places were few and far between. That's absolutely correct. This is this is one that we improvised. We had to land on the highway here because even with the wing tank and the nose tank, we were getting a little bit low, and so we landed there. I'm not sure that turnout that we're parked in there is intended for that, but it certainly worked for it. We discovered in talking to the Air Canada people, who are basically a combination of FCC and FAA in Canada, we confessed that we did this. It was no big deal. No big deal whatsoever. They just said, don't worry about it. The attitude up there at that time was basically these kind of aircraft were pickup trucks. And they treated them the same way. They strapped stuff on the outside. Some of you wouldn't even believe could fly, but they did. And they had and this is opposed to the United States, where landing on a highway required a lot. And you just avoided it. But anyway, this is us sitting on the ground somewhere up in northern Alberta or southern BC. I don't remember exactly where, but that's where we were. We were talking about that trim tab earlier. It's a little tab of metal that's right back here on the back end of the elevator. You can't really see it there. And in fact, it may be on the other side. But that was the trim tab that was upside down. We didn't bother to change that because we didn't. We figured out soon what it was, and we just had to plug that into the thinking.
Can you point out the wing tanks?
Oh, yeah. Well, the wing tank is right up
the other picture.
It's right up in there. You can't see the gas tank there. Here's the gas cap for the nose tank, but the wing tank is right here. I think maybe the next picture will give us. Yeah, there's that's Jerry, KL7GOI, and there's the tank. He's filling it. We taxied down the highway to this filling station. Actually, is like a roadhouse, a combination of mechanics, hotel, grocery store, the sort of thing that's scattered all the way up and down the Alcan Highway. And Jerry's fueling up there at that time, and I think he's actually filling the nose tank is what he's doing. But if you really look hard, you could see that little piece of tubing coming up out of the gas cap, and then it goes down there and it swings down and comes into the cockpit back here. I should mention that one of the unique features of the J3 Cub is when you're flying it alone or solo, you fly it from the back seat. This is a matter of weight and balance, which is important in aircraft. And if you're alone, which is you are when the instructor says, okay, it's yours, and he gets out, you're sitting way in the back seat. And you learn to taxi using what we call S-turns, which is basically kind of a drunk driving thing. You're swinging back and forth so you can see what's in front of you out the side window. Obviously, as soon as you get any speed, the tail comes up and you can see out the front. But you're you're kind of at a hazard when you're going slow. As I said, Jerry's KL7GOI. He's since passed away, and but anyway, it was his aircraft. I should mention at the aircraft. He sold it after he got it up to Alaska, and they put it on floats, and they used it for some years as a float plane because they were very good. As again, they could land at a very slow speed, and you could see the wing is really, really long. And they had a lot of lift. They didn't have much speed, but they had a lot of lift, and they could get out of difficult places. J3 Cub had no flaps. Normally a flap is that thing that if you're looking out the window when the aircraft is landing, your airliner's landing and you hear the noise, these things are running out. Well, that's the flap. We don't have any flaps, so we just have the ailerons, which are these things here, which allow you to turn.
Hey, Bob?
Yeah.
Bob, can you hear me?
What's that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you sell it, Clark? Did you want something?
How did you back out of this gas station?
I can't hear.
Use
I
your
can't hear.
computer.
How did you back away from the gas pump? How did you?
Push it away. We push them away. One person could push these things all over the country. Is it
They're only about 900 pounds.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say 1,000, but Tony's probably right. Yeah, 900 pounds and pretty big tires. Of course, as soon as it got into Alaska, they doubled the size of the tires, what they call tundra tires, because they rode across rough ground a lot smoother and everything. But there's no problem to just swing it around like that.
We just played one 2 weeks ago. After the plane I'm working on was assembled, we had to weigh it to get the empty weight.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And it was 965 pounds.
Okay, well, see, there you go. I got an expert right here.
But we had radios in it and stuff also. We had
I have to rely on my memory. Okay, as I mentioned, we're on the route that we were using to ferry aircraft to Russia during the World War II. And as part of that, these low-frequency radio range stations were scattered all the way up to Alaska and they were in the United States. These were the forerunner of the VOR, and they were actually developed in the 1930s, but they were used of them, and so did England for guiding the bombers and conversely jamming these signals. They were RF signals generally in the these ones that we're talking about in the 500 megahertz and below range. They were 2 transmitters and 4 antennas, and they were directional antennas, and one transmitter transmitted N, da dit. The other transmitter transmitted dit da. And as you can see, if you combine those 2 signals together, you get a solid tone. This is where the phrase that you may have heard "on the beam" came from, because they referred to this as a beam that they could navigate to. There was one low frequency range station still operational in North America. It was in Watson Lake, British Columbia, and we had an AM receiver. All you needed was a receiver. There were more sophisticated ones with indicator dials and everything else, but with just a simple AM receiver, and if you remember the early transistor radios, that's what we had, handheld, would tune below the broadcast band. They would get down to like 500 or 450 or something like that. And you could pick up these signals at that point. And if you heard an N being sent continuously, you knew that you were headed either toward or away from on a particular heading. Now, obviously, there's 2 headings. They're 180 degrees apart. We'll see on the next slide. Well, let's go to it right now. You can see that they're basically quadrants. The N quadrant is the northeast and the southwest. The A quadrant is the northwest and the southeast. So if I'm hearing N, da dit, I know I'm either heading somewhere between 0 and 90 degrees or the reciprocal of that. And based on signal strength and the change and that sort of thing, I'll figure out whether I'm going away or toward it. And if I hit on one of these areas here, I was literally on the beam. I would get a continuous tone right here, either there or there. So again, I got basically four beams. I'm going to have to determine whether I'm going ahead of it or back of it. let's suppose I'm getting a continuous tone, but in the background I hear an A. In other words, it's da, 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 but the A is weaker. I know I'm kind of over on this side. I'm in this quadrant over here. And in order to get on the beam, I need to turn either right or left. Simple decision. And imagine I'm doing this in weather that's sucked in, visibility's down to a quarter of a mile, it's raining, and the wings are icing. But other than that, I'm also figuring out whether I want to turn right or left. Obviously, not the best system in the world, but it was the only thing we had, and it was very useful. The one thing that was advantage of it.
Started in the 30s.
Go ahead. Anyway.
Wasn't that beam technology started in the 30s?
Yeah, so in 1935 is when they started the first in the U.S. They really came into use in World War II, and it was still after World War II we started going into what's called the Omni range, which is VHF AM, which we have now, and there's still what are called NDBs, non-directional beacons, even out here. Those do not have this. They're just broadcasting. Oh, and interspersed in here is the call sign of the station that you're particularly coming. I have to admit that I have wowed more than one flight instructor by my ability to immediately identify a radio range station, because I know CW and they don't. And so they're sitting there and they're marking down that, and then they're looking at everything else. I've got the answer right there. So anyway, just a little aside. Ham radio pays off. Any questions? Anyway, we found this. We knew this station was up there, or actually Jerry knew it because he had been flying in the area, and I had heard about this, but I'd never actually experienced it. So he had one of the early transistor radios, and we turned it on and tuned down below the broadcast band, and sure enough, there's the signal sending A and N, and we kind of flew around in a circle and everything else and experienced the change of the quadrants and everything else. So it was a primitive form of navigation, but it worked good enough to get the bombers into London or into Berlin. Perpetual snow line up in this part of the country. One of the I should also mention, as part of this project of taking all the airplanes to Russia, we built a series of emergency landing strips. They're a mile long, level, gravel, hard packed, and there were, I think there's about 20 of them between Great Falls, Montana, and Fairbanks, Alaska. We landed at one at Burwash Landing. Love that name. But that was one of them. Again, we were getting late in the day. We knew that we weren't going to make it into the next larger city, and we landed at Burwash Landing. It was one of these. It had what was left over, the ruins of a control tower. If you remember the Japanese World War II movies where the airplanes are strafing these control towers. They're kind of a rectangular thing up on some stilts with a roof over it. Well, that's exactly what this was. It looked just like it. And there was a cabin next to it. And we taxied up there, and lo and behold, it was a trapper's cabin. And he came out because an airplane's a big deal landing in that part of the country. And so we got to talk. He invited us to spend the night in his cabin. He even cooked dinner for us. He allowed us how he just came back from, and I learned a new word at that time. He just came back from 10 days in the bush. And I love that word bush because that perfectly describes what this country is like up there. It's like our oak brush multiplied by 10. I mean, you just cannot get through that. And when you talk about the bush, you're talking about real wilderness. Trapping is, at that time, and still is, a part of the economy up there. I'm not making too many 2-meter contacts in this part of the world. There just isn't anybody up there, but I try from time to time, and I don't have it on monitoring, but I'd give a call every now and then, especially when we get near any towns or anything. Here we are. this is the end of the day. It's the evening in Fairbanks. Well, one thing we had going for us, obviously, the further north we get, the longer the days are. And this is the end of the trip. This is about 10 o'clock at night, and it was a long day. And we had flown in from Northway, Alaska. At Northway, we cleared U.S. Customs. And one of the jobs of U.S. Customs, or the people there, was to assure that we had the Alaska required survival gear. Now, Alaska, even in today's statute, still has a requirement of survival gear in private aircraft. And it basically is a sleeping bag, a week's worth of rations, some sort of shelter, either a tarp or something like that. And at the time we went up there, you were required to carry a rifle also. We had a rifle, 30 lever action, world's greatest deer gun. Anyway, we had that along with, and the inspector came out and he looked through this stuff. There's a little tiny space behind the back seat that we crammed all this stuff into, and that's where it was. And we had the rations, and we had the fishing hooks and fishing line, everything that was required. And while he's looking in there, he looks up at the top and he sees all this tubing wound around up there in the bog. And he said, he looks at that, and he said, he looked around, he said, finally he said, "That's the damnedest relief tube I've ever seen."
No, they had to blow in the tank.
Anyway, we were allowed to enter the sovereign state of Alaska and Fairbanks. Bangor was the end of the road. And as a final picture, here is the intrepid young airman standing at the Toad River Esso station where we filled up with gas. You could see the AOPA yellow plastic rule that those of you who are pilots are familiar with that, had that, my pen, and also in there is that little tiny notebook that I kept the notes in. I should point out, just a local interest, Toad River Esso was owned by Bob Fulton at that time. Bob Fulton, it was the former chief of police at Glenwood Springs. And I knew Bob Fulton very well because he was the chief of police when I was in the district attorney's office. We worked a lot together, and he grew up in the Meeker country, and Glenwood Springs in 1970s was just entirely too crowded. So when he retired, he went up to Toad River, British Columbia, and bought this place. And we landed on, in this case, there was a landing strip parallel to the road, grass landing strip. It's still there, incidentally, parallel to the road. The reason I know it's still there is that his two sons and daughter still live there, and they don't own the service station anymore, but they live in the area, and they've sent me pictures of it and everything else like that. This was a roadhouse, is basically a good term for it. It was a combination hotel, 7-Eleven, mechanic, gas station. The most interesting thing about it was it had a fur room, and he traded with the Canada calls them First Peoples. In other words, the native tribes in the area. Trapping was still a big deal, and you go into this room, and it isn't refrigerated, but it's very, very cool. In other words, I would guess it probably was 40 degrees or something like that. And from the ceiling is just rows and rows of these beautiful pelts, fox and ermine and the bear and deer, elk, everything else. And he would buy would trade goods with the First Peoples in the area. And in turn, he'd get the furs, and then a buyer would come through periodically and buy them from him. Very pleasant smell, not at all, and just a delightful place because, say what you want about furs, there really is nothing to substitute the touch and feel of a fur, especially those beautiful silver fox and the white ermine fur. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, that's it. Any questions?
So how'd you come back? Did you fly back?
I flew back. It took As I remember, it took 4 hours to fly back. I flew from Fairbanks to Seattle to Denver to Grand Junction.
Oh, would you do it again?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Have you kept your license up?
No. When I retired, I quit flying because I did. If you need to fly often, you really do get rusty really quickly. And I flew for many years and never had any problems. I used to fly at the latter part. I flew Cessna 210s, which is a six-place turbocharged retractable gear aircraft, which is really necessary to get over the Continental Divide. Most of my flying was either to Denver or Salt Lake or Telluride, where I went on business. And aircraft are just terribly expensive things to own unless somebody's paying the bill. And I lost to somebody to pay bills when I quit working.
So do I owe you money from those trips that we took over to Front Range with our kids?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you probably did because I think you lost some weight as a result of it. But other than that, no.
Did you ever know Glenn Baxter, who opened the airstrip in Green River?
Opened the what?
Glenn Baxter had lived in Green River because he was part of the testing, the rocket testing program that was going on when he first moved there. And when that ended, he opened the airstrip in Green River.
Well, we landed there, so it probably, I didn't know him, but he probably was doing it then. We met Jess asked would I do it again. The people that I met, it was just, it was really great. Some real characters and some, but everybody was fascinating, had fascinating stories. Of course, we down in where I used to go in Texas, we have the term wash ashores. In other words, people that have kind of washed up on the shore down there and haven't gone anywhere else, and they're kind of stranded there. Well, there are a lot of those in northern BC and Alaska, but they're interesting characters and everything.
Did some of the airs?
You mentioned your cruising speed. What was your takeoff speed?
Oh, you could lift off at about 40 miles an hour.
Oh, that low. Okay. Thank you.
They're great. And you land at about the same speed. So, yeah, it's a very safe aircraft, other than it has this phenomenon known as a ground loop, which is a horizontal. We used to call them Brodies in the parking lot. But anyway, it's where the tail, the back and the front swap ends unintentionally very quickly. And that's one of the things of a tail dragger aircraft. In other words, an aircraft that has a small wheel on the end rather than a tricycle up front.
Well, I'll have to tell you something about Dick. He doesn't think that if God made us to fly, that he'd given us wings. Yeah. But he named his daughter Shondell.
A chandelle is a maneuver where I think it was developed by the Frenchmen, and it basically is a way to reverse course very rapidly and go after the guy that's chasing you and really scare the daylights out of him.
Yeah.
So anyway, for some we gave him a bad time for some non-aviation purpose.
Okay, it did. It was developed in World War I as a tactic to. But I speak on airplanes, a little short on ham radio, but I did work a lot of stations going into Fairbanks, a large Air Force base there at Fairbanks. They had a repeater, and I was able to work it from about 90 miles out and work lots of KL7 hams there going in.
Comment. I just went into the other room where the computer is, and I looked up the U.S. Aircraft registrations. So I looked up this November 88420.
Yeah, it's apparently wrecked. It's unlicensed now.
Yes, it was last licensed in 2014.
Yeah, so it's been, it was when you consider that it was built in 1946. You know, it's got 50 some years of useful life. I don't know for sure, but the rumor that I heard was that it was crashed.
They crashed a lot of them up there from what I've heard.
And I'm surprised it isn't rebuilt. And maybe it is being. Maybe there's somebody like Tony and his brother that got it in a hangar and they're putting it back together. I hope there is, because I kind of like to think aircraft like this have a soul, and I had an opportunity to share it for a while, and I kind of liked the idea of it continuing living on. Oh, that's heavy philosophy. Well, let's stop at that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you guys for putting up with my.
Thanks, Bob. Excellent job.
Say, Bob, can you look up
what was delicensed or out of commission? And I said, did you say 2013, Brian?
Yeah, 10/9 of 2014. He said it was expired.
Yeah. So it's either balled up in some birch forest up there, or it's in somebody's hangar, or it's in the bottom of a lake, or who knows. It had a good life anyway.
It got you there.